The second part of this video is going to be on deer hair. It's one of the most universal fly tying materials out there. And when I say deer hair, I mean any animal with hollow hair, basically. So that includes like elk, caribou, moose, whitetail, mule deer. All those animals have hair that's hollow on the inside, and I'm going to show you what I mean in just a minute. But there's a lot of books and a lot of the instructional things focus on how to, work with certain parts of it. But what I don't see is a lot of things is the characteristics of the different kinds of hair, because you can be doing a technique correct with the wrong hair and it'll make it very hard. So I'm going to show you what to look for when you're first starting out, and I'm going to walk through the basics of deer hair. As I mentioned before, all deer hair or anything of the like is hollow. That's what makes it such a great fly tying material. The only thing is some hair is going to be different than others, and I'm going to explain why right here. A lot of times in those different kind of hairs you have really long wispy hairs that aren't going to flare a whole lot, and that's really what we want to do with deer hair. Either flare it out or have it lay down nice and even and together. And think of deer hair as straws. It's hollow on the inside, and depending on what you want to do is going to determine what kind of deer hair you get. This is just a little demonstration that I wanted to do with the difference between coarse and fine hair. Really coarse, long, big hair is going to flare out, has a really high flare rate to it whenever you wrap your thread around it. So like these larger straws, when I pull this down, it's going to flare those straws out because they have more area to compact in each straw or in each hair to squeeze down. So they have a long way to squeeze down, and they're really going to flare out, as opposed to these smaller straws or much finer deer hair. When I put these together and wrap the same thing, you're still going to get somewhat of the same effect, but it's either going to take a lot more force to do it, to flare those out, or you're not going to be able to do it much at all with the size of thread you're using, because it's going to break. That's one of the main differences in picking a patch of hair. Do you want it to flare out and get really big, or do you want it to stay together, have a higher density rate, which will also make it sink better? So you need to keep that in mind when you're thinking of deer hair. What do I want it to do? Do I want it to flare, or do I want it to stay in a bunch together like this? And that'll help you out in determining for what fly the kind of hair you want. This is the main reason that I went through all that with the straw demonstration, is because just because you buy a piece of material in a store doesn't mean it's the right stuff for the job. These are two pieces of what was labeled on the package of white belly hair. This hair is much shorter, much thicker, like those bigger straws, so it's really going to flare out. Has really short tips, and this other patch is extremely long, has really long wispy tips. So depending on what you want to do, one is going to work better for certain jobs than the other. This one would be better for like bucktail streamers or any situation where you don't want it to flare out because it's extremely fine and thin. And this one is going to have a really high flare rate. It's really going to puff out. Has short tips, so if you want a really fine tip fly, where like a elk hair caddis, not that this is the right color for it, but has really nice tips to it, you would want this one as opposed to this one. So different patches of even the same hair, you need to take notice of that before you try to do something. The first thing I'm going to show is spinning deer hair. For some reason, I hear people, beginners and advanced tyers as well, for some reason they talk about spinning deer hair as if it's some extremely hard thing to do. When in reality, when you keep in mind how those straws reacted to that downward pressure, or that pressure that's squeezing together, it's fairly simple. One of the big things about when you're just starting out doing this is don't tie an entire fly like a muddler minnow, where the head is spun deer hair, and you tie this beautiful looking fly, and then you get to the head and you don't exactly know how to do it, and it turns out looking terrible. Get just a blank hook, a patch of deer hair. Sit down and just work on spinning deer hair for until you get efficient at it, before you start cranking out deer hair head flies. Fairly simple. When you're practicing, don't bother stacking it. It's just kind of a waste of time. You're just trying to get an idea of how it reacts. You can play with trimming it when you're done, but take a fairly sizable clump, and if you're not comfortable with it right away, you can thin it down. The smaller, the easier it's going to work with. But all deer hair spinning is, first of all, set it on top of your hook, go around it soft the first wrap, and the second wrap as well, and then let it settle in and pull straight down. And just like those straws, that deer hair is going to react and flare out. Okay, you can peel it back and put a wrap or two just in front of it, hold it in place, and then you just repeat that step over and over until you have the size and the length of the head you want, or the body, or whatever you're doing with it, whatever you're spinning. Okay, when you do your second wrap, or your second clump, and so on, you want your wraps to go right in between the hair and the hook. There's that little V right there where you want your wraps to go. You want to come down around, same as before, 2 wraps, 2 soft wraps, and then pull kind of down and back so your thread works down into that V. Then once you've got one or two clumps on, don't be afraid to pack those together. Okay, pack those as tight as you can. That'll help create a nice dense looking head, unless you're in a hurry and it really doesn't matter what they look like to you. But if you want to apply some to the bottom, if you want the bottom of that head or the body to look just like the top, like a nice trimmed head, you can flip it over. A rotary vise makes that a lot easier. Or if you need to, you can flip your hook over in your vise. But same principle. Clump on the bottom, go over it, first wrap, and then second one loose as well. Pull straight down, and it's going to flare those out. A couple more wraps in front of it, pack it together. And don't be too concerned about catching some of the other strands of hair from the previous patches, because it's just going to flare them back up once you tighten that patch you just put on down. So it'll be fine if you catch a couple of those hairs in there. It's not a big deal. But pack it down and just keep repeating that. Take another clump, and like I said, you can work with different size clumps. You can go from big to little. It is easier to go with smaller clumps when you're first learning. The other thing is thread. You want to use a thread that's not too thick, because you want it to be able to squeeze down on one point of that clump of hair, but you don't want it so thin that it's going to break on you all the time. This GPS thread is pretty thin and extremely strong. Works really well for spinning deer hair. The only problem is sometimes it'll cut right through the hair. But other than that, once you get used to the tension and what you can apply to it, it does a great job. So spinning deer hair, all it is just repeating that step over and over. And if you have any questions on it, again, feel free to email me, and I'll try to address that. And if you need a more detailed explanation, I can try to help you out. But it is very simple. Like I said, don't try to do an entire fly first and then just a small portion of it, because if you mess up, you messed up the rest of the fly. Just start with a bare hook, pack the whole thing, and then you can practice trimming it. You can get your razor blades out and trim it, because a lot of the big heads are trimmed with razor blades, but you can still do it with scissors. So you can play with it, give it a haircut, try to shape it, and just get used to how it's going to react. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. For those of you just starting out, I hope it's a good starter for explaining how deer hair works and what you want to look for when you're purchasing different patches of hair. Hopefully you all get a chance to participate in the fly exchange. I think that'll be a really neat program to put some flies in your box and help you become more efficient on certain flies. The next one I think I'm going to do also on deer hair, because there's just so many little things that I like to cover with that. Then this one was a little bit shorter. So the next one will probably be covering similar topics, and hopefully we see you then.